Hello, everybody. Chris Samartage here, Brotherhood of Light Show, current YouTube channel, and subscribe if you like. I don't ask everybody to subscribe, but I think I'm going to this week. I'm trying to get more people involved. Okay, this week we're going to do two bands that were in 1969 that had debut double albums. So let's get to the show. I got to get my screen share here and get my laser pointer going. Here we go. So screen share and laser pointer. Come on, baby. Here we go. Laser pointer. Working. Okay, there we go. So here we are. We got Chicago Transit Authority and the Sons of Champlin. So you may ask, what the hell? This is the Chicago Train Authority line here. Well, yes. And the Sons of Champlin, that's a band out of San Francisco. Yes. Okay, that's who we're covering this week. And these two bands were kind of rock and jazz, and they both had horns. They're horn bands. And so they were both signed about the same time. And I think the record labels at that time in 1968 were interested in bands with different sounds other than just, like hard rock bands or rock bands. So they signed both these bands or different labels, and they're both double albums that came out. They both have really good lead guitar players named Terry. And they also are both double albums for debut albums, which is pretty amazing. And so we're going to get into Chicago now. A lot of people think of Chicago as a pop band because they had so many pop hits back in the 70s, but they really were a rock band in 69, 70, 71. And we're going to cover those years of those albums. They're just the first two records, but they're both double albums. So let's get back to the beginning here. Here we go. So, okay, here's the beginnings. Okay. So Chicago, they were called Chicago Transit Authority, okay, after the railroad in Chicago. These guys are from Chicago, and they played, I looked it up on setlist.com. They played all these early concerts in 68 at this place called Brandy's, and I think it's the same place. It's Brandy's Pizzas, now it's still there in Chicago. And then they moved to LA, and they were like the house band at the Whiskey A Go-Go. So they were playing there constantly. They had a lot of respect by the promoters. And Bill Graham had hired them to come up, and they played at the Fillmore West. They did that, they come up every couple of months and play there during 68, 69. And then they also played at the Fillmore East. So Bill was very aware of this band, and they just played a lot. Now, they recorded this album back in January of 1969, and it was released in April. So the album came out. It's called Chicago Transit Authority. It's this really rockin' double album, and they ended up touring a lot that summer. They opened up for Jimi Hendrix. They played at the Fillmore opened up for the Moody Blues. They ended up eventually headlining the Fillmores themselves, but the album only hit number 14 on the chart in 69. Okay. But there was so much music going on. And so the next thing, here we go. We're going to check out the band and the album. So here's all the songs that are on it. And, I would say there's this song, it's called Freeform Guitar. It's the total Jimi Hendrix feedback. And this guitar player here, this guy, Terry Caff, it's just him just wailing back on like Marshall amps, doing all kinds of Jimi Hendrix sounded feedback. I don't know if when I saw him, he incorporated into the show. And the other thing about him is he's a lot like Jimi Hendrix. He was a really dynamic rhythm guitar player. So he could do what Jimmy did. He could play these super aggressive rhythms and then pop right into a lead solo and then back into the rhythm. And so he had that progressive sound. And Hendrix had seen him and thought he was a better guitar player than Hendrix himself thought Calf was better than Hendrix. And then so all these horn guys that are in the band. Uh, so there's three guys in the band. Okay. There's that are kind of the singers. Okay. There's Peter Cetera. He's the bass player. Okay. He is, let's see, where is he over here? There he is. He's singing right here in the blonde hair. Okay. Then there's Robert Lamb, who's the keyboard player and probably another singer, wrote a lot of songs. And then there's Terry Calf, who's another singer and played lead guitar and rhythm guitar. So that's the band members. And then they got these three horn players and the horn. Now, a lot of times you'll see a band in the, that plays that has horns. They just have horn charts and they're kind of like doing this backup horns for the main song, but these horn guys are they're mixing they're like a fourth instrument in the mix, and they're actually writing parts and mixing in. So it's very, very sophisticated style music, but they're doing like rock horn section, which is unusual. And it's not just backup horns like a lot of bands. So here's all the songs that they did, and you can read them for yourself there. Okay. Now we're going to move to the next slide. And here it is. So then they ended up changing their name from Chicago Transit Authority to Chicago. And then they recorded this Chicago record, this silver album cover, in August of '69 in the middle of touring. And somehow they had to squeeze it in there in August. I don't know how, but as the story goes, and I don't know exactly where they were, but I think they were in LA and they rented a house and they went in there and they've been playing constantly like these club gigs and like house bands at these different venues. So they were really seasoned guys as far as playing together like a band. They had really meshed. And they wrote these two records, the Chicago Transit Authority and the Chicago Silver, which is Chicago 2, I guess would be what you could call it. And they wrote all the songs for both, and they're both double albums. So you've got, 8 sides worth of music, and sides were like anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. So it's a lot of music they wrote. They had it in the can, and they would play both albums live, even though the second album hadn't even been out yet. So, and here's the band right here back then. And this is what they looked like on stage with the 3 horn players in the back and behind the drums. And then, so they were quite a group. Now I saw this show. This was in March of 1970 with James Cotton, and then they were playing at the Winterland. So they already were pretty big. They had a lot of hits out at this point. And so what happened was, so that album came out, and so they re-released Chicago Transit Authority in 1970 and 71. And it was on the charts for 171 weeks, which is just, it's like a record. And then they also had the Chicago self-titled Chicago album, Chicago 2, maybe you could call it. And then that hit number 4. And then the re-release hit number 9. So they had all these hits off this records that were playing on AM and FM. So they were super popular. So let's get to this next slide. Okay. Another story here. They were playing at, they were scheduled to play at Woodstock. Okay. But they also had contracts with Bill Graham, and he was booking them a lot, as I talked about earlier. So on Woodstock weekend, which is August 15th, 16th, and 17th of 1969, they ended up being yanked off of Woodstock, replaced by Santana, which Bill put in there. And Santana just broke big off that movie. And they ended up playing at the Fillmore in San Francisco, Fillmore West. And I actually went to that show, and when I was 14 years old, and saw Chicago. And I was just told that's when I bought both the record. I bought the first album, then I bought the second album a couple of months later, and I went to the other show. So I had seen them twice, and they were just great live. And so this was the set they played. Just transcribed it here. I got this from setlist.com, which is really cool if you guys ever check that out. And so here's all the songs. And these are a combination of songs from both those records. Now I'm not going to read them off or anything, but they did the freeform guitar intro. So he did all this feedback and then he broke into the next song. So that was really, really cool. I remember him doing that, and it was kind of, wow, this is pretty psychedelic. So they were kind of jazz, rock, fusion, rock. Okay, that's what they were at that point, okay, in their career. Then they came out with Chicago 3, and there were so many albums came out in 71, so many great records that just kind of got washed away. I never heard it. I listened to it recently. It's kind of jazzy, it's kind of rocky. It's not quite, and the hits were overpowering still on the radio. So that record kind of got lost in the wash. Then they did Live at Carnegie Hall, and then they did Chicago 5. And that has the big pop hit of, Saturday Afternoon in the Park on 4th of July. And I just, at that point, being a rock guy and listening to fusion and jazz and rock and going to the Fillmore and seeing all these bands, I just washed them off as a commercial pop band. And so they had a lot of hits in the 70s, and I just really didn't listen to them at all until I saw them later on, a couple decades later, and they did a variety of their music. So I'm going to get to the next band here. And this is the Sons of Champlin out of Marin County. And there they are in the shadow of Mount Tamalpais. And I know that Bill Champlin went to Mount Tamalpais High and had a band in there when he was very young. This is Bill over here. And I believe that's Terry Haggerty. And here they are when they finally got their record deal. And so they were kind of they were a funk jazz rock band. Okay. So they had this funky element, but they were similar to Chicago, but they didn't have the commercial success, but they were successful and they did play a lot. So here we go. Now here's the 2 records they came out with. And there's the band, there's their promo picture. And this was the first album, Loosen Up Naturally. It's a double album. It's got all kinds of great songs on it. It's really the classic if you want to get one of the original records. The second album is just like Chicago, they changed their name to just the Sons. So you had Chicago Transit Authority, they're just Chicago on their second album. The Sons of Champlin are just the Sons on their second album. So it just kind of a similar thing. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide. All right, here we go. So they had a song called Freedom. It was whole album side. It's a total jammer. You got Terry Haggerty just wailing on guitar. I mean, he was like a jazz guy, and he could do all these scales, and he would just introduce his jazz into the rock licks and just tear it up. Probably one of the best guitar players in the Bay Area as far as his just technical ability. So they played at Winterland with the Jefferson Airplane, Grateful Dead. They played at the Fillmore West. They played as the Sons with Country Joe, the Fillmore West again. And they did this song called Get High. That was kind of their famous song. And they were big advocates for smoking marijuana before it was legal. But anyway, in California, it was pretty cool. And now here. So the next stage of this band was that the Grateful Dead would play at Winterland and Fillmore all the time. And here's Jerry Garcia. And Jerry Garcia really loved the Sons. The whole band, they dug the Sons. They were friends. They all, were in the same neighborhood. The Dead were now living in Marin. There's Mount Tamalpais here. And there's Terry playing guitar, and Jerry loved him. So they opened up for the Dead like 71, 72, 73, 74. they were at almost every show at Winterland. The Sons opened up for the Dead, and this album came out, and they had gotten rid of the horns, and they just were this stripped down, musicians that are in the band. And it's called Welcome to the Dance. And you can see they're still kind of this organic hippie band. And they had 2 keyboard players, and then one of them would play xylophone, and then they had the drums and the bass and the guitar, and then the guitar player Terry. But a lot of the guys would switch around, and maybe Bill would play guitar, and then somebody else would play piano or keyboard, and then they just rotate sometimes, and you didn't know what you were going to get. But they were just incredible musicians, and they had this funky quality. Their music was really great. And they were super favorite Bay Area band, and Northern California. Everybody loved the Sons. They toured all around. They played up at Tahoe a lot. And so here's a picture of them playing at Winterland with the Grateful Dead's rig on stage. And then here's that album during that time period. And this is called Circle Full of Love, which was another album they came out with. And then here is a later release, live in San Rafael, California in 1976 or 75. And then this came out in 94 or 93, and it's the best of Sons of Champlin on CD. And if you use CDs, it's the one to get. It's got all their music, all the stuff from the first 2 records, and a couple other songs on here. So, but if you want to collect them, the first 2 albums and Welcome to the Dance are really where it's at, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know what this live one is, but I bet you it's really good. I just saw it on, now that there's new releases come out all the time. Okay, so now here we go. So they opened up for the band at Winterland, which is great. A good match, the sophisticated music. And now there they are. This is one of their last shows. They played up at Kirkwood on the outdoor stage. I saw them there that weekend in 77. And so it was the Sons of Champlin. 1963 when they formed their band in Marin County, and then they ended in 1977. So this is the tie-in right here. Now, so we go back to Chicago, and there's Terry Kath, the guy I talked about. It was just this incredible guitar player, songwriter. And as you can see there, 1946 to 1978, Terry had an accident with a gun and accidentally shot himself. And it was, really a bummer. So Chicago called up Bill Champlin from Sons of Champlin, the lead singer, rhythm guitar player, keyboard player, and said, why don't you replace Terry? We want you in the band. And he refused them. But he came back around in 1981 and joined the band and played with them until 2009, and which I saw him around 2007, 8, sometime in there. And they were with the Doobie Brothers, and they played their hits, but they played their rock music from these first 2 records also, which, they kind of ended the show with that stuff because that's kind of their best material. For a rock guy, I just really like the early Chicago Trance Authority, the early Chicago stuff. And so now we're going to go to this. So here's Bill Champlin, Sons of Champlin and Chicago. There he is. And here he is with the band right here, sitting here. And this is Chicago 19. And they had a hit. It's called, where's my notes here? Oh, Look Away. So Look Away came out on Chicago 19 in 1988, and in 1989 it hit #1 on the charts. So Bill had a #1 hit with Chicago, and I'm really happy for him. And he didn't write it, but it still was a #1 hit. So, and then I don't think they had any other #1 hits, but they continued to tour as a classic rock band, and they're still touring today. And Bill finally left the band in 2009. So I thought that was a cool tie-in. The Sons of Champlin, the 2 original psychedelic jazz rock horn bands of 69. So I'm going to go back to myself and sign off here. So anyway, that was my Chicago and Sons of Champlin show with Bill Champlin, ending up championing the band and being one of the lead singers, and get a #1 hit. So my hat's off to these guys. So I hope you guys enjoy the show. I went a little different direction, but still in the same vein of the early rock bands of 1968, 1969, 1970. And so we'll see you next week. I have no idea what show I'm going to do, but I'm signing off.